Hello, and welcome to the Range Project podcast. This is your host, Chris McGrory. I'm currently a senior at Harvard on the baseball team, and I study psychology and economics. And in these conversations, I'm trying to learn from those around me. I want to understand what my amazing guests do and how they do it. That means getting tools, tips, tricks, and routines, plus the mental frameworks they have, so you and I can apply them in our own lives. Now, today we have my friend Meshaal Bannerman. From Avenel, New Jersey in the Woodbridge Township, at Harvard, Meshaal studies government and economics and has held leadership positions such as Vice President of Black Men's Forum and President of No More Names, a nonprofit to raise money and awareness for social justice initiatives and activism. And let me tell you, this one was especially insightful and inspiring. Meshaal admits he's had a lot of time to reflect deeply, thanks to the pandemic this past year, on his role amidst current events, the adversity that's brought him here today, and the vision for who he wants to be. And that definitely comes through. Now, you can think of this conversation as having two halves. In the first half, we talk about what he does, like moderating a panel with Dr. Cornel West and being at the forefront in his community, from rallies to town council meetings during the social justice reckoning this summer, plus his take on effective versus virtue signaling activism and really tactical questions to ask and actions myself and others can take to be the best ally in this cause. And in the second half, Meshaal uncovers the person behind all that he does. I so appreciate Meshaal sharing a particularly vulnerable but important inflection point in his life, the loss of his father at 13, and how that forced him to grow up a little faster than he wanted. He also shares his journaling practice that combines objective self-reflection and goal setting, his morning routine, the important lessons he's learned from failure, and a lot more. So, listen to hear the tactics and mental framework Meshaal uses to stay even-keeled amidst all the ups and downs of life, and how he stays true to himself, including serving his community through it all. Please enjoy this one with Meshaal Bannerman.
1, 2, 3, do it!
Meshaal, how you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for making the time to chat with me. I mean, I just texted you a day or two ago and you're like, yes, let's sit down and record.
Of course. I mean, I was listening to Brian Shees and like all the other ones, and it's been really insightful and like really in depth. So of course, it's an honor to be on here and great to just chop it up.
Thank you. Thank you. And I see you're is that your bedroom in Jersey right now?
Yep. This is my childhood bedroom where I've taken all 5 of my classes from last semester. So it's been a pretty chaotic time in this pandemic, but just grateful through it all, really.
That's unfortunately the reality we find ourselves in, but like most things, you're making the most of it. So like I said, big time thank you. And I'm thinking we hop right in, and I want you to talk to me. How did you end up moderating a panel with the Cornel West, Reverend Al Sharpton, NBA player turned writer Etan Thomas, and journalist Bill Rhoden? Like, how did that come to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those like life accomplishments that you just, you're going to look back upon and just really, be like, how did that ever happen? And I'm still really not sure how it happened. I would say it was just like it was a product of really my vision. As soon as I was elected as vice president of BMF, was to like find a way to like get the space, bigger platform, and inviting speakers who I know would be like really insightful and have a lot to say from their own experiences to Harvard's campus. And it really started with like a lot of like cold call emails, a lot of just kind of, reaching out to people and seeing what would happen. What people really don't see is that it took a lot of rejections from like a bunch of different names. And those were just like 4 of the names that like said yes, and all happened to be on like one specific day, which was, really just the stars sort of aligning. But yeah, it took like months of preparation for sure. Like, in the summer months while I was like interning on in New York, I was also sending a bunch of emails and just getting on the phone, explaining what BMF is, why they should come, and really just kind of persuading and selling BMF as much as possible. And it turned out to be, just a product of me like staying committed and not really taking no for answers sometimes, but also, just the fortune and like a lot of people just feeling, or the 4 guests who ended up saying yes, really just feeling, I guess like some sort of way persuaded by me, which is, it felt honorable. Yeah, it really did feel like some sort of blessing for sure.
Were any of them super hesitant? Like, did you have to get your like salesman on, or did you kind of just like present the message of Black Men's Forum and said like, hey, this is my vision, this is what we want to do? Were they receptive, or were they like, no, I'm going to need some convincing?
I'm not going to lie, it took some convincing. So there was like there's like a backstory behind like all of what happened. So first, I was just trying to have a debate between Cornel West and Al Sharpton, but I'm also like pretty good friends with Etan Thomas because we've done an event together in the past, the spring before that. So he also reached out and said, like, can we do some sort of debate at Harvard? And this was all while I was, trying to get the main event up and running. And he said he'd bring Bill Roden, who's like a big journalist in like the sports journalism scene.
Right.
And also he was saying he was going to bring Jesse Jackson, who's like a huge civil rights activist.
That would have been crazy.
He of course ran for president like in the late 80s, I want to say, as well. And so I was just like kind of blown away by the fact that he was trying to bring 2 other people as well as himself into the fray and kind of, being able to spin this all. But the issue arose that when he kind of came with this proposal, I of course had to bring it back to Dr. West and then Reverend Sharpton as well. And, once you start to add like different people into the equation, it gets a little messy and sticky. And it just like so happened that what went down was Jesse Jackson is kind of the mentor for Reverend Sharpton. So the moment I brought up his name, he was Reverend Sharpton was willing to do it. And then like a week before the event happened, Jesse Jackson's like kind of, he's on the older side. So his health isn't, I guess, in the best shape currently. And so he had to drop out. And then it got really messy because I had already used that to sell it to Sharpton because he and Cornel West had a little bit of beef. So he was kind of on the iffy side of like, should I do this? And then hearing Jesse Jackson's like, okay, like let's step in.
Yeah, he's the glue.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the moment, the glue comes apart, it's like,
oh no.
But luckily I was able to get on the phone with his scheduler, and she was like a really nice lady. I just kind of explained that, like this could be like a really great event. And like, as bummed as I am that Jesse Jackson is not really going to be on the panel, I think it could still be like a really productive event. And I really did have to persuade. I remember this was like around a week or 2 before the start or before Halloween. So like, it was like a lot of things going on, obviously with like campus, the social scene around Halloween is like very, you feel the vibe in the air, but also like midterms and stuff coming up. So I was like full on stressed and, trying to sell this vision as like a 20-year-old boy to like someone who's, a civil rights activist. And like his team it's a lot of pressure.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but I was able to pull it off. And I think it's just a product of, not only myself, but also the rest of the BMF board and just, our product and our commitment as well to, bringing a lot of big guests and doing what we thought would be best for our organization.
Well, I mean, like I said, I watched the YouTube recording, which we can link, and it was phenomenal. But I got to ask, how nervous were you before that event? Like, you handled it perfect, but I mean, like, those are some heavyweights. Like, those are some names.
So I had never spoken in front of that many people before, even though it wasn't that many. I was still nervous. I remember like I even like slipped up on my own name at one point. I was just kind of like very like, I was nervous. I mean, like when you're like sitting across from, so many people who like you look up to and you idolize, but also you see in the crowd, like, a lot of your own friends and a lot of your own people as well. It's just like, it's nerve wracking. And I was very nervous, but then I think like midway through it all kind of like, it all kind of like settled down a little bit. Like after I got the first few questions off, like William Roden, who was like co-moderating with me, like kind of just tapped me, said, "You're doing a good job." And just like, I like the questions, and like, that like little encouragement, you can't really see because it's off camera a little bit,
Right.
but it did a lot for me. Just like, drink my water, calm down, and just, it turned out really well because I was able to like just dictate it in a way that, wasn't too rushed or wasn't too slow at the same time.
Yeah, it was perfect. And then you're ringing the timer bell on Dr.
Yeah.
Cornel West. And then he's laughing about it. Like, I don't know. That was awesome to see.
Yeah.
And I mean, your questions were perfect. How did you come up with those questions? Like, you could ask anything.
Yeah. So I would say like 2 weeks before the event, like a group of BMF representatives and like a few other people as well, kind of like we all just sat down. I would say like 5 of us, as well as kind of 2 people from the Harvard Foundation, just to kind of like see like, what the topics we want to kind of discuss. Of course, we had to get pre-approval from all the panelists before, but then kind of like deciphering the questions and how we wanted to frame them in like one direction or another. So one of the questions, for example, was about Obama had made like some comments on cancel culture. And I knew like kind of going in that, you have between Cornel West and Reverend Sharpton, people who feel a little bit differently about Obama. So I wanted to pose the question in kind of a neutral way that would let their own opinions kind of shine through their answer. So it was just kind of like a matter of, really deciphering, like doing research, obviously, number one, on like the differing views of all the panelists, and then 2, like seeing like the current topics, such as like at the time, like Kanye West was like making headlines. I think Colin Kaepernick had just like done a workout like at like a high school. So kind of using that to kind of bridge some joint vision of, you have people who are talking about, their own specific opinions, and then also current issues to make it very relevant to people in the audience as well.
Yeah, it was super, like you said, relevant. It was super accessible. Like, these were issues that were in the news, like everybody knew about. And then also, like you said, you could just let them riff on. I mean, they took the issue that you posed and then just like ran with it, which just made for an awesome conversation. Yeah, I mean, that was really insightful for me. I don't know, for me, like the message I took away was this message of like love and moral consistency.
Right.
Those are kind of like a theme throughout. Obviously, that's Dr. West kind of theme, right? But I don't know. I feel like I heard that through all of the speakers. I was wondering, what was your big takeaway from that conversation?
Yeah, I would say my big takeaway, it came in 2 different aspects. I would say my big takeaway as someone who's like very social justice focused was the fact that you have to challenge the spaces that you're in currently. This came up in 2 different aspects. So one, it came up at a time when Reverend Sharpton kind of talked about the endowment that Harvard has. And, even with that big endowment, like what we're spending money on. So like, being very fossil fuel oriented as like a school, and like just being a very business focused type of school, and like challenging Harvard to do better, just the same way we challenge, people who run for president do better, or people who are on the national scene. It starts at home as well. And then the other way that it came up was when Dr. West made a comment kind of saying that people who are part of Jack and Jill, which is like this very kind of elite Black organization of like people who are like really wealthy or connected, if those people were ones who were getting incarcerated at the regular rate as like the everyday Black person, then our debate and our conversations about mass incarceration would be much different. And the reason why that kind of like was a big ding ding in my head was because, as someone who's like now entered a lot of different elite spaces, I think it's important for me to understand that, my experience now is not the same as, someone who like maybe even is living in the same town as me and like it doesn't go to Harvard. Like, I have to understand that, the privileges that I have now shouldn't stop me from fighting for, a lot of things that could be the case if I was, just less fortunate, or I was just, less lucky, really. So I think that really kind of set off some sort of like ticking time bomb in my head in terms of like, hey, maybe, I should also step back and start to challenge the own things that I do in my life, whether that be, the groups I'm in or even the friends that I'm a part of, and see like, how can I challenge them to be better? How can I challenge myself to be better, and the spaces that I'm in as well? And I think, Dr. West, he's always unapologetic in saying how he feels. And I think that kind of was one of those things that like, it felt like it was directed at me, even though it wasn't. And it was just like one of those things that, you take away. no matter how long or how removed you are from the conversation, it still kind of sticks with me today.
What is one thing that you see you've like changed in yourself, whether that's challenging a space you're a part of or just like the behavior that you have?
Mm-hmm. I would say questioning my decisions more. I think in the past, I used to do things just because, I kind of wanted to just do them, or I thought they would look good on a resume, or I thought, this is like what every typical Black Harvard person does. But now I've kind of got to a point where I start to question, the decisions that I'm making, whether it be like, a job, whether that be a class that I'm taking, whether it be anything. Why am I doing it? And is it something that's beneficial to me and me only? And starting to kind of like realize that I'm able to better understand myself by just questioning the things that I'm doing more and like actually reflecting on them. I think, the difficult part about being a Harvard student in general is that you kind of just tend to go on like a typical path as in your 4 years there. You take the same sort of classes, you do the same sort of extracurriculars, you're in the same sort of social circles more often than not. And starting to like sit back and reflect on, maybe at some point down the line, you have to do what's best for you, even if it's at the expense of, what the mass does, in a way. I think that's something that I've been more cognizant of since that discussion, really. And it's just kind of been a product of really understanding that, there's only one path that was meant for me, and understanding that I can't really be running someone else's race, but I only can run my own. It's just a huge part of my life that I've really been in control of in the last like 12 months or so.
That's awesome to hear. And what I hear is a lot of intentionality behind what you're doing. And even if that means going against the grain, like you're very intentional, like, okay, I'm doing this for this reason. And like you said, there's a lot of pressure at Harvard to just do what everybody else does. And it's super easy. And the tough part is it gets rewarded. It gets like, you get rewarded financially and you get rewarded socially. Like everybody's telling you what a good job you've done. And it's like, how do you stray off that path when all of your rewards are pushing you in this direction?
No, definitely. It takes a lot of courage. And, I'm not even gonna lie to myself. Like I'm not at the point yet where I'm like, I'm fully there yet, but at least I think now that I'm starting to question it, the 4-year growth, I think me as a freshman coming in at this time, wouldn't really be questioning that. I would just be listening to what other people were saying and what other people are doing, but carving my own path and doing my own thing and really kind of understanding that, whatever reward there may be down the line for either, whether it be taking some class or taking some job, whatever, taking some social space, whatever that is it beneficial to me in the long run is really kind of a question that I've been posing to myself more often. I think a lot of Harvard students in general can really benefit from understanding that their own path and their own journey oftentimes does not lead into the same way as the preconceived notion of like what we're supposed to be doing at like 20 or 21 years old.
Can you say more about that? Like what makes you, I guess what makes you say that?
So the reason why I say that is I think at least among like the people I know on campus, I think we often tend to do the same things. So we often tend to, spend our 4 years and get a pretty good job afterwards, tend to go to grad school after, then go to another like really high paying job, and then like, settle down and whatever it may be. And, kind of just along the way, we're doing things that are like either really beneficial financially or are sort of kind of like have the prestige and have the elitism behind it. And I think that if we're able to actually sit back and unpack and realize that like sometimes you have to sacrifice the quote unquote elitism or the quote unquote financial gain that we see in front of us for things that are not just to the betterment of us, but to the benefit of the communities that we serve and the people around us, that, our journeys are going to at some point be a little different. And I think that, for me, just in general, that's something I've tried to realize is that, I don't always have to be chasing what's most sought after. I don't have to always be chasing what's, going to pay the most. I don't always have to be chasing what's going to look the most elite, what's going to look the best, quote unquote, on your resume, but I should be chasing what's for me. And I think that's, it's always better said than done. But I think for me, I've been very intentional and very, even in this lockdown period, just like focusing very much, like I'm sitting in this room, I don't really have much else to do but just think. And I think I've been thinking a lot about what's for me and what I think is, things that are going to better myself, better the things that I care about, the people I care about, the communities I care about, and just overall the vision that I care about.
And I guess upon that reflection, what are those things that kind of like get you up in the morning, or it just like feels right, like in your chest, like, all right, this at some point down the road is something that's important for me? And I think an overarching theme is like doing what's best for others oftentimes like ends up being what's best for yourself. And it's like, you don't see that link. But for me, like the more I look up to people I respect and mentors, it's like, oh, they didn't take the path that was best for them and laid out on paper. They ended up being of service to others or being other focused, and they ended up fine, So like there's some resistance to taking that first step, but I'd be interested to hear like what you've been reflecting upon in the past. What is it? 8-12 months.
Yeah, no, for sure. I would say, to put it very short, I've been just thinking about how I want to be in the trenches, kind of fighting for people who've had their voice muted or have had, their voice minimized. And I think for me, where this kind of stems from is like just the way I was raised and kind of the childhood that I endured. But more so now that I get older, it's, seeing the difference between spaces like Harvard, spaces like my hometown, spaces like other, where other places I've lived as well, and kind of seeing the differences between the contrast of, people of color in those respective communities, but also just seeing the differences in like things such as wealth, things such as upbringing, opportunity, things of that nature. And it's something that, for me, who's like, I haven't really, I've been blessed and fortunate, to have like a roof over my head. And that's something that I'll never be able to characterize enough how thankful I am for that. But I think for me, just like growing up, I was able to see the differences between, or how important it is to give someone an opportunity to do what they want to do. And I think for me, what I want to fight for is to give that opportunity for a lot of different people, and to fight for, a country or a community, whatever it may be, that can really provide those selective opportunities that they give to maybe one or two individuals for everybody. And I think, in the last few months, I've been sitting around, listening to a lot of political discourse, listening to a lot of, discourse on social media, on the news, whatever it may be, and kind of just understanding how like that's really what I'm passionate about, is fighting for others. And like as you said, sometimes what's best for other people might be best for you. And I truly believe that putting myself in a position where I can listen to other people and amplify their voices, not talking over them, but amplify their voices in a way that brings their issues and their problems front and center to whoever is the decision maker, is something I'm really passionate about. And I think you kind of seen that in whether it be a lot of the things such as like the panel or a lot of different social justice events that I've been a part of. It's about amplifying the questions, the concerns that people have, and bringing them to the forefront for a lot of selective change makers and people with power.
And we'll definitely touch upon the events of this past summer. But I mean, this reflection and this, I guess, I don't want to call it passion, but this work goes before just the events of this past summer. I mean, you were involved, you're a co-founder of No More Names, right? Was that with Chris Edgy?
Yeah.
So,
he's the guy.
So my bad. So you two, I mean, that was founded years ago, right? And maybe you could speak to like the mission of that organization and like the work you've done over the past few years.
Yeah, of course. I would say like, first off, like all shout outs to Chris Eggy. He was a basketball captain his senior year. So his story is amazing, just because as like an immigrant from Canada, he went to play basketball at Montverde, which is the same school that produced like Ben Simmons and D'Angelo Russell, RJ Barrett, a bunch of different stars. Goes to Harvard, And he found like a place where he could be more than just an athlete. That's like a common saying, LeBron trademarked that, but like
Right.
he truly is like the example of that. And I remember, me just being a freshman at the time, I think it was my freshman spring. I think he had reached out to someone on BMF board, who would be involved or who would be like, someone who's an advocate or someone who's not willing to, hide their words when it comes to like social issues, because there had just been a recent police shooting at Harvard's campus, a police brutality incident at Harvard's campus,
Right.
where, an international student was beat at Yard Fest. And he, from day one, just brought me on and like, took me under his wing and kind of just gave me an opportunity to be myself, but also gave me an opportunity to make mistakes, gave me the opportunity to grow. And I think that kind of just showed through No More Names. We were able to take it from, in one-off event that happened that spring where we brought in Vic Mensa. We raised like a ton of money to give back to Campaign Zero and really just amplify the voice of our lost, or not our lost, but the victim of police brutality at the time. And then we were able to turn that into something that it wasn't just a one-off event, but a continuation of something. And I'm not as involved in No More Names now because it's pivoted a little bit to a more athlete-focused space. But up until this summer, we were just working on a lot of different things. To just take you through a time, like my sophomore year, we had done an event with Emerald Garner, who's the daughter of Eric Garner, who was, of course, like the infamous incident in New York City where he was
Right.
chokehold over like a bunch of cigarettes. And Etan Thomas, again, who was on the panel, he was at the event as well. And it was like a really good dialogue and a really good, I guess, a second step from building upon what we had done before the previous year. And then we had taken that framework to a bunch of different campuses. So Dartmouth had a similar event. Brown had a similar event. We did something similar at Penn as well. So we were able to take it to a bunch of different Ivy Leagues with the same blueprint. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to do it this past spring. And of course, with the big social justice reckoning this past summer, we were also, at the forefront of a lot of different change at a lot of different change, including some change upon DC in Washington as well, where we were kind of lobbying for Emerald Garner to have this bill on behalf of Eric Garner to be put on the floor of the Senate and the House. Unfortunately, kind of was a little bit, I guess, put into the Justice and Policing Act. That's like the big thing that they're trying to get pushed now. But still being at the kind of forefront in terms of like social justice on college campuses and working with, people directly impacted by police brutality. It was like a huge thing. And again, I can't like thank Chris Eggy enough for that, Vib, a lot of the other guys as well that are part of No More Names. And it really gave me an opportunity to find my voice and just learn more about how to bridge between communities of color, local activists, and, a lot of the quote unquote power players that are really kind of, I guess, blind to a lot of the struggles of different people as well.
Right. And when you're trying to tackle like such a big issue, I'd be interested to hear like what were those early conversations like around No More Names?
Mm-hmm.
Like you could go in so many different directions, like what's going to be most beneficial, what's going to have the greatest impact. You guys kind of found your lane with athletes and artists, but like this whole branch of political lobbying and all of the funds that you raise, like that's like the kind of the behind the scenes that I'm not as familiar with. So I'd love to hear like, how'd you get there and what did those early conversations look like?
Of course. So like, as I said, like my freshman spring, like I was just under the impression that this was going to be like, a one-off event, a concert series that kind of, was going to raise money. And then, we go for there. But I think in that summer, Chris had like a bigger vision that was something where he wanted to spin it into a way where we can draw awareness consistently, and not just like at Harvard, not just at the Ivy League, but across America. And in a way, this is kind of like has played out really naturally in a way that's kind of different than our initial vision, which was to, have this branch of like the Ivy League schools initially, then you have the East Coast, then, you spread out to the regions, like, you build slowly.
Right.
But because of this summer, like we were able to much more quickly kind of mobilize through like the athletes, I guess, like conferences. And now like it's a more, I guess, segmented across the nation and like a very much more natural and I think more effective way in general. But our early conversations were really just about how do we leverage, the point where we at as college students, where, we have the privilege of the ears of a lot of our university presidents, who have the ears of local congressmen, senators, even the president, like Harvard, for example, is almost like the fourth branch of government at some point. But being able to use our platform as college students or college athletes, whatever it may be, and really just fostering that as some sort of leverage to change was really our big mission or a big vision. And then being able to understand that what happened at Harvard, it can't necessarily be replicated at other schools. We have to find a way to make it so that we can do this at Brown, we can do it at Dartmouth, we can do it at Princeton. And really that was spearheaded behind, getting artists who already have, anybody, regardless of, I guess, your political views, you'd be willing to listen to, whatever artist you may be, or whatever artists Yardfest, for example, whatever artists you find really popular, and kind of using the connection between celebrities who have a huge platform, college students who have a pretty big platform, and combining that to join forces where the umbrella under all of that is social justice, police brutality, the mass incarceration system, and kind of using athletes or celebrities who, fall under that umbrella, fit our vision, and then going from there was really kind of our driving and our drawing board, quote unquote, for our organization.
I love that. And it kind of goes back to something I picked up on the BMF panel, shining a light on an issue and keeping it there.
Right.
So, I mean, it sounds like No More Names does a great job of that. And then also the funds you raise that are more directly impacting. I'd be interested to hear how do you weigh okay, yeah, a lot of attention is important, but what do you see to be all right, these are the things that make the biggest impact, this is what helps us move the needle forward?
No, totally. I would say the decision making behind that usually comes from, not just a cost benefit analysis, but more so understanding the people who we're trying to help. I think oftentimes when it comes to activism and comes to making change, we tend to just be centric on, the people we're already talking to or ourselves. And for us, one of the big things has been to talk to a lot of different people in the communities that we're trying to help. So for example, at Harvard, our understanding of, the broader Boston community is very limited. So being able to talk to people in select communities, whether that be in, Boston, whether that be in, New Jersey for Princeton or other different cities, and getting the feedback from, people whose really their day-to-day job is almost being a full-time activist, and hearing what they have to say, what their vision is, because at the end of the day, they're more knowledgeable than us. The only issue is their platform has been almost ignored by a lot of different people, and finding a way to just bridge that connection has really been the big thing.
Well, thank you for explaining that. And yeah, that helps me better understand the origin story, and then also the work that is continuing to this day. But I mean, you personally, you're not only leveraging this platform, but I mean, you're also out there leading rallies in your community, especially this summer, right?
Yeah.
So were you always politically, socially active, or is this something you've kind of come out of your shell in the past few years? Because those that before I really knew you, you'd come across as a soft-spoken guy, and then you're out here leading your community in Avondale and Woodbridge. I'd love to hear how that came to be.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I would say the honest truth is I haven't always been this way. I was always politically knowledgeable, and I think that stemmed from just being in a house of a house where the news was always on every day when I'd come home from school, so I would always know what was going on, and also would talk to my teachers at a very young age about things in the news, and would be very much in the know of a lot of political things, or even just the regular 6 o'clock news. And I think a lot of people my age at the time weren't really as knowledgeable, so that gave me a head start in terms of really just understanding how the world works at a very young age. But I was also always a soft-spoken person. I was always someone who just liked to observe more than like to speak. And I still am, just like in a different way now. But yeah, when I was really younger, I just kind of was like a very shy kid, and like even my first few years of college, just very shy. Just talk to people that I really like enjoy to start conversation here and there. But I wouldn't really be outgoing. You're not going to see me kind of just like always being the loudest voice in the room. I don't think like I don't ever want to be the loudest voice in the room. Really, I just like to kind of like listen to other people and form my opinions and form my decisions from there. But I would say definitely over the past few years, I've learned how to gain my voice in a more effective way than I was in a way that I wasn't able to when I was younger. And I would say that stemmed from not just knowing names, but also taking on leadership roles in BMF. First, I served as political action chair, then vice president. And I think for me, I was able to take a big leap personally by understanding what leadership means, understanding what it means to be a leader in terms of you don't always have to be the one who's speaking. You can also be the one who's just leading through your actions. And for me, I think this past summer was like a direct reflection of that. While yes, like there are often times where I was the one who was speaking and like I was articulating my point in an effective way. And like, of course, being someone in my hometown who like goes to Harvard, I do have the privilege of a different platform than other people. But also using that to draw people in, using that to kind of amplify the voices of people who like knew about a lot of things happening in Woodbridge better than me, or who like are, have, I guess, not the privilege, but are kind of stuck in Woodbridge for, who knows how long, whereas I'm like in and out more frequently, and just kind of understanding that for me to be like the person I want to be and to serve the communities I want to be better, I have to take that leap of faith, not just in myself but also in other people, and not just go for myself but bring other people behind me, all the people who believed in me, all the people who like see some things in me, bring them with me. We all can kind of like eat together, we all can kind of like do the things we want to do together. It doesn't have to be, just me kind of at the forefront of a lot of things.
Right. In those moments when you were at the forefront, it was well received. So that must be like, okay, like what I'm doing is right.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what were some of those maybe behind the scenes leadership roles that not like formal leadership roles, but like you said, like leading through action, and it was not necessarily in the front of a rally.
Yeah, for sure. So we had a group this summer called WOW, which stood for Woodbridge Youth for Liberation and Equity. And so this group arose from the fact that I had gone to, so we had, let me just give you a timeline. So
thank you.
In late May / early June, of course, like as in every city, Woodbridge was having its protests where, I think this was one of the largest not just protests, but largest gatherings in Woodbridge in general, where like over 5,000 people showed up to the protests, where I spoke at as well. And then I went to the following council meeting. So the protest was on Sunday. The council meeting was on a Tuesday. And I went to the council meeting and said, so now that we had a great protest, now that we kind of have this momentum, what are we going to do with it? And I was like immediately kind of shunned off by the council president and the mayor, who kind of said, I'm comfortable with the police here. You should be too, even after I like shared an experience of myself kind of being like racially profiled and experiencing myself being uncomfortable with the police. And so then I had reached out to this girl, Charity, she goes to Wesley. So she's also kind of in the Boston College area. And she organized the initial protest. And I reached out to her and said, hey, maybe we should find a way to kind of mobilize more people. Because to be honest, I was the only person at the council meeting. And I felt very alone and isolated, especially when they kind of like shut me down, and realizing that, it takes an army and not just one person to foster change and foster the appropriate dialogue. And so that's how the group started. And so from there, we had different meetings throughout the summer to organize what we're going to do at council meetings. And for me, like what that entailed was oftentimes, being the strategy person in terms of like, hey, you say this, you say that. We had like a list of demands that we wanted, our township to fulfill, and drafting those was one of the things I was a part of, but also delegating, you do research on this, I do research on that, you speak on this at the meeting, and things of that nature was a lot of what I was doing this summer. And it was great to not just be able to test my own leadership skills, but also learn from a lot of people around me. I think growing up in this town, like oftentimes, I was in a way separated from a lot of different people because I was either playing soccer a lot or I was, in the house studying a lot, which is like the sad reality of it is. And just to be able to kind of like, see a lot of myself and a lot of the people I was working with in this town, growing up in Woodbridge and, having certain characteristics, like you're hard nosed, you're very tough. I think it's a lot of things that I was born upon just being in this town, and seeing that in a lot of different people I was working with this summer was a huge thing. And, just being able to, again, lead, but also learn was a huge like stepping stone for me this summer. And, oftentimes, when we'd go to council meetings, it didn't really go the way we wanted to. And oftentimes it did. And I think being able to stay level-headed throughout all of that was like a huge learning point for me, has had like previous struggles with like, not getting too high, not getting too low. But I think this summer is where I found how to be level-headed and medium through it all. And that makes me a better leader as a result.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I have to double click if you're cool with talking about those high highs and low lows. Were they how are they connected to this?
Yeah, of course. So one of the low lows was I was blocked by my council representative. So I had tweeted at him
on Twitter, right?
Yeah, on Twitter. I had tweeted at him to kind of like make note of something that was happening in the town. I think this was actually immediately after the protest. I had tweeted at him and said, what are we going to do about police reform in the town? He had no response to that. And then I had quote tweeted a thread where he had turned his back on a bunch of different people in the town at a council meeting. This was like when I was at school, so I didn't know about it. But
I saw that. That was It's for the people who haven't seen it, and I'll try and link it. Like physically turn their back on somebody speaking at a town council meeting, like somebody part of the community bringing a point that they want to be heard. So like not just like colloquially turning his back, like physically in his chair. But sorry to cut you off. Keep going.
No, it's good that you explained it, because when you say it out loud, it sounds even worse than I like imagined in my head. So I tweeted that picture out and I tagged him and I said, we have representatives such as his name, who are turning their back on, citizens who are just raising concerns. And like a week or so after, I remember I wanted to tweet at him again, and I noticed I was blocked. I was
how petty.
Yeah, I was in total shock because, like, I mean, I don't really care that someone blocks me. It was just the fact that he represents like Avenel specifically, literally in the larger Woodbridge Township. So like for him to block me was like, it felt like, suppressing my own right to be a citizen in this town in a way. And it was just like, it was a huge slap in the face. That was one of the biggest lows. Another big low was I had a phone call with the mayor after he had skipped basically all the council meetings after the first one where he shut me off. He had refused to email me back, refused to call me back after like numerous times, or anyone in the organization for that matter. And I finally got on the phone with him, and I have the recording of it actually, but he basically said, the Black Lives Matter movement is awful, and like it won't have any place in Woodbridge. That was another huge low. I would say like, overcoming those and like making sure that I wasn't too rattled either way, and not taking the blocking personal, not taking the mayor of a town where it's a majority non-white town and saying that it's a movement for equality is awful. Not taking that personal was like a huge stepping stone for me, because I know for a fact me freshman year I would get very like pissed off at that. And then the few highs were just the fact that I was able to connect with a lot of different people, and we were able to like have some sort of like minimal change, I would say, in terms of they did commit towards like putting more money towards like mental health resources, in terms of that being a big problem in Woodbridge. And also they removed they have like basically this blue strip for like the whole month of June that kind of represented the Blue Lives Matter movement. And I kind of like noted how that was like really a slap in the face when none of them were even able to say Black Lives Matter at any council meeting. They eventually removed that. I don't really see that much as big as a win, but taking a step back now, like a few months later, it was kind of, I guess, like a positive step. And sometimes you have to take those, those small checks here and there. And like, you never know, like maybe as we continue to push for change, like those type of little things can add up and build something bigger. But I would say like those are two examples of, wins and losses, and like staying in between and staying firm throughout.
Well, thank you for sharing. That makes That makes a lot of sense. And I guess I probably should have brought this up at the beginning. Like
Mhm.
that first town council meeting was in response to Woodbridge increasing like the funding for the police
Mhm.
and like the number of people on
Yeah.
the police force, right?
Yeah.
And this is, like you explained very articulately, in a town that is safe and not full
Yeah.
of violent crime, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We have like one violent crime per 1,000, which like visualize that. That's pretty very low.
Right. Okay. And so you had all of these points, and then just like, I think something you said, like, made me really reflect. And it was that, like, an increase in the number of police increases the probability of racial profiling, which
Hmm.
increases the probability that something goes wrong, that increases the probability that you're hurt or end up dead. And like
Yeah.
hearing that from a friend of mine, just like,
Hmm.
I know it's like I'm going to go psych, but like you put like a face to a problem.
Yeah.
And when that face is your friend, you're like, oh my God.
Hmm.
And then the disrespect that they had, I mean, they didn't let you continue to speak or comment.
Yeah.
And then they just kind of brushed it under the rug. So first I
Hmm.
want to say, like, you going to your town council meeting did have like an effect on me, just
Hmm.
reading the transcript, right? And then, but I'd love to hear like how you responded to the disrespect and like how that played out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was like one of a lot of examples in the summer where I would try to like personalize my own experience or a lot of things that I had overcome, I guess, like as like a youth growing up in Woodbridge. And it felt like it was very like pushed aside and not really cared for. And I think for me that was like very tough to like it was very tough to just overcome just because, as someone who like prides myself on being born and raised in Woodbridge, it's somewhere like I'm proud to be from. I think this summer was the first instance where I wasn't proud to be from Woodbridge. I mean, it hurts to say that, but it really was the truth in terms of like I would try to, articulate as best as possible in terms of, when you are talking to people who may not understand certain issues, it is good to personalize and put a face to, a lot of different struggles. And I think I was very intentional in doing that. And even throughout, it felt like I was getting a cold shoulder the more and more I tried to, understand like you know, this could be your black neighbor, this could be your black friend, whatever it may be. And like even it shouldn't really even take that, but I try to use that as an effective kind of way to kind of center certain people, to center and to bring out the emotions of certain people. And I think, I took Samantha Powers class this past semester, of course. So you
Yes.
kind of talk
Yep.
about, yeah.
So did I, obviously.
Yeah. You learn about kind of like the effective ways of making change. And I reflected on this summer and I realized that I had used certain aspects of like that switch framework, whatever it may be, in terms of, like motivating someone to make a change in terms of sometimes you need to have an emotional appeal. And we use that a lot. And it was like just it was very sad to see that it wasn't as effective as I thought it would be because they seemed unwilling and unwavering in their belief. Even, people sharing their very personal experiences, even in spite of the fact that while this was all going on, there was a police incident in Woodbridge that we still don't really have all of the information upon. All we know is that someone was put in the hospital with stitches. And despite all this, like they were really unwavering. And again, it was just like, it was really disappointing. And it was like, it made me want to fight even more in a way. And like, it kept motivating me. And I guess like for our group as a whole, some people received it in different ways. Some people got burnt out really fast because of that. And I understand that. For me, I guess it kind of propelled me to a different way in terms of like, if these people aren't really affected by, an emotional plea, they're going to be affected by me being consistent, me being at like almost all of these council meetings and me continuing to show up and, using the 5 minutes of time I have every 2 weeks or so and speaking out. And even if it may not eventually lead to change, I'm going to do all that I can to really kind of promote change and all that I can to really be an advocate of change.
And yeah, I mean, all you can ask for is that you're heard and they listen to you. And then
Mm-hmm.
when that's not even taking place. Like, I so respect, like, you're just relentless, like hitting the problem from different angles. Like you said, you mentioned, yes, Meshaal and I had the privilege of taking a class with the ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Power. And so, like, we learned all these different tactics to implement change. So, like, this is really tactical stuff. And so, first, thank you for sharing. And while this particular instance might not have been like the most effective, over the course of the summer, there were big changes. You could argue like really positive or like not enough. And I'd say probably both, but in a Harvard Gazette piece that kind of profiled you and kind of like why you're out here at BLM rallies, you mentioned that there's a big surge of checking the box activism.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then not only like checking the box activism, but also like how somebody in my shoes, a white guy, can be the best ally in this cause. So I guess it's like a two-part question.
Yeah. So in regards to the first question, the checking the box activism, I guess for me, one thing that's like a little bit disheartening is when, I kind of get the sense that people are being a little disingenuous in their activism. And I saw that a lot this summer, especially like on Instagram, Twitter, where it felt like people were more so virtue signaling that, they have seen the problem, and not that they really cared about it, but they had seen, what people had posted, they had seen what's going on, but they didn't actually like commit themselves to, ways in which they would either provide these conversations to the dinner table in ways in which are different ways in which they would change themselves or change their previous actions, wherever they may be. And I think it's one thing that's really frustrating again is when people tend to try to partake in activism for the approval of others and not actually to provide change. I think, with social media, it's a twofold. Social media is really good because you're easily able to connect with other people. But I think a downside of social media is a lot of people don't realize a lot of the work that needs to be done is way beyond social media. It needs to be done in, your local council meetings. It needs to be done in your local neighborhoods, your dinner tables. Like, it can be done as small as like you're mailing in your ballot, whatever state you're in. There's different ways in terms of like actually being a quote unquote activist. There's different ways in terms of actually like fostering change. But I think oftentimes people choose to, do the easiest option, which is, reposting a flyer onto Instagram. Nothing wrong with that. But I think there's ways in which we can challenge ourselves to, go beyond that, which is like, I think, become the status quo. And then to answer the second question, what someone like you can do, I think what I always ask people of is, where do they see themselves in the world in relation to a lot of these social justice issues? Meaning, one, how affected are you by it? Two, what is your knowledge of it? And three, what ways do you think you can change it? And I like to hear like what people have to say about each of those questions and then go from there. So oftentimes, to the first question, like, how are you affected by it? Oftentimes people are not really that affected by it, which is like, of course, okay, like everyone has their own privileges. To number two, like, what do you know about it? I oftentimes try to ask and see, what do people know about police brutality? What do people know about mass incarceration? What do people know about different forms of racism that exist in, our local communities, exist in businesses, exist in whatever it may be? And just to try to challenge and question the knowledge of people, because I don't think you can actually create change until you're actually at a point where you feel knowledgeable speaking about these issues, or at a point where you can properly articulate to one person who may be rattling off a bunch of, conspiracy theories, fake information, and hold your own and actually articulate what you mean, articulate things that can be like, that's kind of like something, a way I didn't see it. And then the third thing is like, I think I want to challenge people on is ways in which you can kind of foster change, whether that be through voting. That's like, I think, one of the bare minimum ways. And like, I don't like to overemphasize that point because I don't think that's enough. ways in which you can vote and hold your elected officials accountable after the fact. Like as soon as Joe Biden was elected or president, even though a lot of people may not agree with that fact, but as soon as he was elected president, I was already kind of unwavering in my belief that, you know, he should be doing more, whether that be like, you know, who he's approving for his cabinet, who he's or what statements he's making, and things that he's looking to do in his first 100 days. Like we should all be doing that. And not just from an electoral perspective, but also like in a more local community perspective, knowing what your local councilman, your local mayor is up to in terms of, you know, the police budget, in terms of programs that are meant to foster, you know, inclusion in your town, whether that be through something such as like putting more funding towards mental health resources, putting more funding that may look towards reducing the homeless problem, putting more funding towards just issues that may be oftentimes, you know, lumped into this overall thing of things that we don't really care about, but should. And I think for me, understanding that, you know, racism is something that will always be here until we actually do something intentional to take it away. I think that's a really big point that a lot of us kind of do not feel impacted by enough. And I think for me, it starts with the conversations, like things such as this. Then it starts with, you know, the self-reflection, you know, what can I do better? And then it starts with, you know, looking at, you know, ways in which change is oftentimes, you know, produced, whether that be protests, whether that be votes, whether that be, you know, attending council meetings, whether that be writing letters, whatever it may be, and finding ways in which you are doing the most you can do in all of those different kind of categories. And I think that's like a twofold way in which, you know, you can kind of see yourself in terms of being like an advocate for Black people. And I think you always have to be like a listener first and a talker or a speaker second. And then also I think through that you would like remove the big issue of like the check the box activism that I think a lot of people are doing, which is like they center themselves instead of centering the problem at large.
Right. My activism is not to show the world what a good person I am. It's to solve these issues, right? Which seems so obvious, but like that's not always a given. But what I'm hearing and what's really encouraging is when I see issues on the news or reading whatever, it's just like feels so big. But what you're saying is like, okay, what is your sphere of influence? My sphere of influence in a suburb of Boston is going to be a lot different than yours, which is going to be a lot different than somebody on the West Coast, what have you, in different scenarios. But just like that idea of like, there are people, there are issues in and around me that might be different from what's on the news, but are going to have an impact. And like, that's my sphere of influence. And so that's kind of like me interpreting what you said. And that's encouraging, right? It's not like you're going to have to solve the problem yourself. Like, no, there's like these little things. And like, you literally just rattled off lists of small things you can do. So thank you. And that just like shrinks the problem into something that's shrink the change, right? That's a shout out to our class, but no, that just like is really encouraging. So with this background, understanding you and everything you're passionate about and have been up to the past year plus, I'd love to hear kind of like how you got here and like the motivation behind it all. Because like you said, some people get burnt out, and not only in the social justice movement of the past year, but just like in your life, having come from a place that's not necessarily a feeder for Harvard, right? Like, and so like your motivation through it all and like kind of what fuels you. If you want to take that, or I could, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's a great question. I'd say I would start with the fact that, you know, growing up, I'd say that I had like a weird inflection point when I was 13, but I would start with, you know, the times before that. I would say before I was 13, I was like a very shy person, a very athletic person nonetheless, but like I used my talking usually was done when it came to like athletics. I was a big trash talker. And that was kind of where I expressed myself a lot. And I still
That's
am
funny.
a big track.
Yeah,
am a
but
big track
trash
stalker.
talker in like FIFA and not
Yeah,
like,
it's way different.
yeah, it's not personal, but keep going.
Yeah. And when I was in the classroom, I was quiet, but I was really good. But I wasn't the one to like boast and like, the same way I was like on the field, juking people on recess. I wasn't doing that when I was in the classroom. It's almost like I had like two different personalities in a way,
Right.
because I hadn't really come into my own. I think I was still kind of, in my household, I lived at the time with my dad, my mom, my sister. And I still was kind of just coming into my own, being the youngest child in a way, and finding where I fit into the world. And, I was really young at the time. I was just like a very observant person. And I think I wasn't really at the point yet where I can fully express myself. And like, I wasn't really sure of like kind of, again, my like surroundings in the world. Like, what am I? Like, who am I meant to be? I think it wasn't until I was 13. So this is when I was in eighth grade. I started to feel a little bit into myself. Of course, like that's the time where like, as like you turn a little bit into from a boy into like a little bit of a teenager. But I think for me, the evolution like started in that summer a little bit. So my birthday is June 23rd. So that was the day of our my birthday is June 23rd. So that was 3 days before our middle school graduation. My dad had been really sick that summer. The start of the month, he had been in and out of the hospital like a few times. And it like had been like a really big issue between his liver. See, my dad was like the type of person who like he would hide when he was sick, or he never wanted him to look weak in front of us in a way, and like would be very discreet in terms of like how he would express himself. And like I was, the curious person I am, I would like take note of this and like would realize that something was off. And I remember, he was in the hospital for almost that whole month. And again, this was like let's say this is the 26th. So it was the day of my middle school graduation. I remember like being almost like top of my class, also like NJHS, like National Junior Honor Society, whatever, like being very excited to graduate and go to high school. My sister was again older, so like I heard a lot about high school. I was hyped. I was ready to go. And I remember just as soon as I left the middle school graduation, my mom had like taken me out. Like I didn't even stay that long for pictures, taking me out and went to the hospital. I'd already been there the morning of to get my tie tied by my dad. But as soon as I got into the hospital, my dad was like not awake. Like he was asleep. And like it didn't really register to me at the time that like something was off, because I was so excited about graduating that I hadn't really reflected upon what was going on in the room. And it wasn't until the doctor kind of pulled me and my mom out at the time and like had the speech with my mom that, it all registered that my dad was like done basically, and he had passed away. I remember when I first came into the room, I had that yellow slip in the back there was basically the slip to say I had gotten honor roll in all of my marking periods as a middle school student. And I put that on my dad's bed at the time because, again, I thought he would just wake up normally. And my dad was someone who was big on me striving to be the best I could be in terms of school, in terms of soccer, whatever it may be. He was like the one person who pushed me very hard. And I'd say like I still kind of like hear his voice today in terms of like do more, go harder. And I think for me, like that kind of changed who I was as a person. I went from kind of being someone who wasn't really sure of like who I was and who I could be. And I think after my dad had passed away, I felt this burden and I felt this like sort of chip arise on my shoulder to like be better. And like I'm simplifying it a lot, but I think it really hit me as soon as I got into high school, or really honestly, as soon as I tried out for the high school soccer team. Like I'd always been like a pretty good soccer player, but I think it's when I realized that like my mentality in terms of the way I do things had risen to a level that I don't think it had before. And like I was going into high school, again, like going through puberty, understanding who I was, physically, mentally. And I think I was going through a lot of different emotions, not having my dad and not having someone, a father figure in my life really to kind of go through these changes with. And it kind of forced me to be a man faster than I really wanted to be. And I don't want to lie and say that, sometimes we're harder than others. Like there were times when like I was like very sad. There were times when I was very high. But I think for me, the person that I am today would not be, you would not be seeing the person you see today if it wasn't for a lot of the events that happened in that summer of like 2013. I think I was forced to evolve, forced to, think bigger, forced to be a more independent person in a way that I wasn't before. That trash talking little kid on the playground now became someone who's like more composed and more humble in a way that, I think serves me for the better now. I think losing to my dad showed me that like I can really lose anything at once. I can really kind of like lose, whether that be, my mother, whether that kind of be something small, such as like the game of soccer or something of that nature. I can lose anything, and to be grateful of what I have and to make the most of what I have is a big thing that, has stuck with me since that day. And I would say throughout high school, I used this to kind of be a leader in my own different way. Again, I was like not really the most vocal person until like my junior year of high school when I like started to take upon more leadership roles. And I remember I was kind of going through a phase like between my sophomore and junior year of high school where, I had just been, spending my whole summer, or going into my sophomore year, just been spending my whole summer kind of playing soccer, expecting to be on the varsity team. And I went to Ghana that summer to visit a family, and I came back and there was no spot for me. And I remember it like being the worst possible individual, like one of those me first type of players. And I was very focused on my role in the team and not so the team at large. And I was like the worst teammate ever. Mind you, I was like captain of the JV team at the time, and I was the worst teammate ever. Like had the worst attitude. I was late to almost every practice, every game. Like I did not care to be there because I was more so focused on where I thought I should be instead of focusing in the moment then. And I remember something had kicked in at the end of the season when I had handed in my jersey to the coach, and he said he expected better from me. And I think that kind of like flipped a switch in my life where like I realized the trajectory that I was going upon, was that something that my dad would be proud of in terms of my own personal growth? Like, yes, I was becoming more independent, but I don't think I was becoming more of a man than I should be. Like, I don't think I was taking upon the right character traits of being a selfless person was the biggest thing. I don't think I was taking upon the character traits of being a good leader, not one who was focused on my own individual accolades, but one who was focused on, the power of team, the power of community. And I think since that moment, I've kind of evolved who I was as a person. And I think growing up, I was, again, like very unsure of who I was. Like, I don't really remember that much of my childhood, but I do remember that I was one who was like more loud in the house than I was outside. And I think that started to switch as soon as my dad passed away, where I started to, take upon leadership roles, not just in my house, but also outside of the house. And I think, sometimes you have blessing in disguises. And I think, me being forced to be a leader was a blessing in disguise. And I think when you like rattle off things that have happened in my life, or when you kind of talk about, how did you do the panel? How do you continue to be a leader in the social justice scene, whatever it may be, that all stems from me being forced to be a leader and me being forced to be independent at like 13 years old when I didn't want to be. And it was out of necessity then, but now, while some parts of it is out of necessity, now it's much more natural to me. Now it's much more easygoing to me. And I think that's really, how I've been who I am today. I've looked upon, different role models at the time. LeBron is someone who's like I've taken a lot of like notes from. Kobe Bryant as well. Like I like a huge sports fan, so like I like to take notes and things from different sports players, and they have a lot of overlapping stories from mine that has kind of like made me realize, okay, I'm not alone in this fight. I'm not alone in times when we'd come back home and my mom's like obviously going through it and she's working like almost throughout the whole day just so that we can kind of like keep our house, keep a roof over our head and whatever that may be. And, looking for people who like made it out of worse situations or similar situations and just keep pushing myself is like really how I came to be who I am today.
Thank you so much for sharing, brother. Like, I can't imagine going through something like that on a much smaller scale. Like, my father had a health scare this fall, and it just puts into perspective how in the blink of an eye, like everything can shift. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people have been forced to confront that with COVID this past year. And like, you wouldn't wish that upon your worst enemy, but
yeah,
it's really, really inspiring to hear how you took that and you took that hardship and you learned from it and you grew from it. And I can say, like, the Meshaal I know is that selfless team first dude that he might not have been in the 9th or 10th grade. So
Yeah.
like, just first, big time thank you for sharing that, like being so vulnerable. That's that just shows your self-assuredness. So thank you. And I mean, going off of that, not on a lighter note, but I think it is connected, is like these quotes in your social media bios
Yeah.
that I think kind of embody some of these ethos. And you can take one or both, but your one is the Roosevelt quote, "Man in the arena,"
Yeah.
which we know it's like, okay, the man in the arena with his face marred with blood and sweat, whatever. It's like, though, you got to be that guy. And then your second one is be phenomenal or be forgotten. And I'd love to hear how those came into your life. How do you have those in the back of your mind?
Yeah.
And like how those have influenced you, and just kind of like what they mean to you.
Yeah. So the man in the arena one is like the big one for me. I remember first hearing this, I think my junior year of high school when I was taking US history, and my teacher kind of like explained like the significance of, the Roosevelt speech at the time, and also like the quote, how it's kind of like been immortalized kind of in a way that's like shown like the significance of it. And I think for me, like at the time, like again, like I was a junior in high school. So like I was still, again, like forming who I was and kind of still like being the self-assured and being like the leader that I was aiming to be. And I think the time that I, came across this quote could not have been a better time in my life. Understanding like when you read the quote, it's not the critic who counts. It's, the person who's in the arena whose face is, marred with like dust, sweat. And to me, that embodies like who I want to be as a person. I don't want to focus too much on what people are saying about me if it's not, things I can improve upon. I want to focus on, the arena, putting myself in situations where I might fail, I might not come out on top, but I know that I put, as much effort and as much drive as I could into whatever it may be. And I think for me, this quote is like something that like I put in like a lot of my bios. It's something that I read often. And the reason for it is because for me, I always need to remind myself that though I may fail and though I may fall short from here and there, what matters is the fact that I'm putting myself out there and learning from my mistakes. And, whether I may have sweat, blood, tears, whatever it is on my face, I'm exerting all that I can to kind of see what can be done. It's something that, this quote has kind of been like taken by like LeBron in recent years, or he like puts it kind of like the man in the arena and stuff. And like, it's been dope. But for me, it's like something that's very personal, because I think at the time when I was like first reading this quote, I was someone who like considered myself the man in the arena, and I had like, it felt like I was alone in the arena. And like this kind of quote like signifies that it's okay to kind of be that one person in that arena, in your own arena, your own life, whatever it may be. As long as you're kind of putting what you can, fighting as hard as you can, failing, but picking up on things that you failed upon and improving the next time is really the big thing. And, Teddy Roosevelt was like someone who I would never imagine to like really like inspire my life with like this quote, but like it's been like very deep and kind of, my driving back of the head type of thing.
And shout out episode number 1, Matt Thomas and Garrett Walker go deep on Teddy Roosevelt and this quote. Yeah. And I think, I'm not sure if Noah mentioned it in episode 2, but it's actually the first quote you see when you walk into the athletics locker room. It's just like the Dylan Fieldhouse. And so inspired by Noah, like we'll tap it and just like remind yourself like, hey, it's not the critic who counts. That's outside of your control. Like, okay, let's work on what is in our domain. But just like throughout all of this, and even from like a young age, like an 8th grader, and then also this summer, you mentioned just how much like self-reflection you've done. Maybe this summer it was forced, you're in your room, but I'd love to hear like more concretely, how have you found to be the best way you do self-reflection? Is it you sitting with a journal, writing out your thoughts? Is it you in dialogue, in conversation with family and friends? Is it you laying in your bed with staring at the back of your eyelids? Like, what does it look like? Because like, I think understanding ourselves and asking those tough questions and just kind of going down those rabbit holes is like when we'll get to like the truth of like who we are and who we want to be. And if you could share any of like those tactics, that would be really insightful.
Of course. I'm a big journaler myself, and I think that really stemmed from like middle school. Like, weirdly enough, was like when we had to like journal like a daily, you know, when they're teaching you how to write and whatnot.
Right.
And that like stuck with me. And I think it wasn't until like I got midway through high school where I started to like actually just like write casually. And like now in recent years, it's become like more so like a way to jot notes and kind of just reflect. I remember I did it a lot in the summer. I think my first summer after like the freshman year of college, where I kind of wanted to, you know, just debrief on like things that had happened, you know, because the world seems to be moving very fast. Like I was like, I'm already going to be a sophomore in college. Like there's no way. And I started to realize that, you know, me reflecting on myself consistently, like as I was approaching life, was key. Whether I even be like on a weekly thing, which I typically try to do. But sometimes, you know, I get lazy. It's like a 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it may be. But always consistently looking back on, you know, some big decisions that I made in whatever time period it may be. You know, what are some things that I think I could do better? Who are some people that I, you know, have had some good encounters with, or some people, you know, who I think I'm, you know, maybe falling out with, or what are some things that I can kind of do to, you know, mend some relationships or things of that nature, and just really being my own biggest critic, but also my own biggest advocate at the same time, I think is something that I do in my own reflection. So again, that I don't get too high or too low, but I'm just telling the truth as it is, and how I see it to be. That's really kind of the biggest way in which I reflect personally. It's just like writing down like a lot of different things. Sometimes it's in the notes page. Sometimes it's just like I had this like huge journal I could actually show you. But I had this journal that kind of like goes through. It's yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I kind of like just always try to make note of things that, you know, I've gone through, experiences that I've, you know, encountered, overcome, failed from, and just, you know, being the better person from all that information and all the situational experience that I've gathered.
That's so sweet. And I'd love to ask, are there any, well, it sounds like a lot of it is like looking back, say it's your week, like, all right, decisions, people, and I'd love to hear, are there any like questions you ask yourself that like prompts you to go off? And then are you ever thinking about the future in goals, in visions, and writing down your thoughts on that? Or is it more of like a assessment tool for you?
I would say it's both. I say like I'm a very goal-oriented person. I think I was a more goal-oriented person before I was a reflective person. This all started again like my junior year of high school. Like I made like, you can kind of see it, like I have like an easy board where I like wrote down a list of things, and I can wrap it off to you. Like 2016, I wanted to move into the top 5 like academic class. I wanted to increase my GPA, get a certain score on my SAT, be soccer captain, be all division. And just kind of like doing this when I was like, looking back on it, like doing this when I was like 16, like it's immense. Like it's something that like I realized it's like a good habit to like have. And now I do this like whether it be before every semester, like listing off like some of my goals. Like for example, this past semester I made a goal like not to get any grade below an A-, or I made a goal to, you know, go to at least an office hour every 2 weeks or whatever it may be, and like setting these like little baby step goals that like, you know, as someone who's always writing, I can always check my goals and always check to see how I'm progressing, whether it be, you know, on a week by week basis again, or a monthly basis, but always kind of having something to work towards, so I don't feel lifeless, so I don't kind of feel, you know, that I'm going through the motions or burnt out. It's like, it's huge for me. Like I'm like someone who like needs those type of things to kind of keep going and stay motivated.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I'm glad I asked. That's so sick. Yeah, man. I mean, journaling has been huge for me, just getting my ideas out of my head. Like I've heard, like your head is for coming up with ideas, not for remembering. And being in dialogue with yourself is like, it's been transformative. And for me, that's been a morning routine. Like I found if I don't do it first thing in the morning, it's kind of going to slip down the to-do list. And so that's just what works for me. I'd love to hear for somebody who seems to do so much in a day. Do you have a morning routine that kind of kickstarts your days?
Yeah. So this morning routine I have now has been like with me, I'd say like since my, again, freshman year of college. So I try to wake up like sometime before 7 or like around no later than 7:30, hopefully. Wake up, try to get a workout in, usually come back, shower, come back to my room, and then do like a different assortment of things. So of course, like I try to read the Bible. Like I usually have like a plan that like I'm reading from, or like maybe it's just like the verse of the day for that day. It depends like kind of what's going on. Then I also try to like read the news. Like I'm a big like news person. Like, and again, this kind of stems with like when I was younger. Like I always like read kind of like the daily briefings from the New York Times is my biggest one. And also like I'm a huge podcast dude. Like funny enough, but I read the daily, or I listen to the daily like either when I'm working in my workout warm up, or if I don't finish it throughout the rest of the morning. And also I just like to kind of just sit back and just reflect on what I want to do in that day. So I usually like have on my computer like those sticky notes pads and kind of just like reflecting on, let's do 2 pages of this today or XYZ. Again, like I'm a detail oriented person. So I kind of like to use my morning routine to like first start off really good with like a workout to like feel better about myself and like wake up with my body. Then like kind of like get more in touch with like my spiritual kind of my spiritual faith, of course. And then also standing back and like realizing, I guess like what goals do I want to accomplish in that day, or what things are like happening around the world as well. So I'm not just always focused on myself, but also like knowing what's going on as well. And like as someone who's like always kind of passionate about things that are going on in the world, it's the best way to stay updated as well.
That's so sweet. And I guess if you had to guess around what time, so you'll wake up hopefully before 7, and then you're crushing podcast and lift. And is that like a weight training strength workout? Do you run at all, or is it pretty much just lifting?
I run sometimes, not as much as I used to.
Obviously, like with soccer.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, you kind of phase that out. Out. Okay.
Enough, I hate running for now, but I try to like, I don't run more than like a mile like at once.
Got you.
So I do some running, but usually just kind of just like lifting. Yeah.
And for those that don't know, Meshaal has gotten big throughout college. Not to say when I first met him, he wasn't an athlete, because he was always an athlete, but he looked like a soccer player. Now he looks, he's filled out. So whatever he's doing is working. So people take notes. So wake up, then lift, then reading the Bible, reading a verse. I'd imagine like reflecting upon that and like how that kind of like sets an intention for the day, which I think is so important. And then you said, okay, then you're getting that news, setting your like goals for the day. Do you set your goals like the night before, or is it really like in that morning after you're clear headed from what's come before it?
Yeah, I like to do mine in the morning just because I like to have a general understanding of like how what my body's telling me in terms of like how the day's going to go. But also just like reflect, like usually like when I'm working out, I think a lot about things. It's like coming straight from that in the shower to like now your thoughts are all at the front of your mind, just like jotting them down. It's like what I typically like to do.
I love that. And I'd imagine when you're working out, it's like, I don't know, you listen to music? Yeah. So I've found like there's not a lot of like inputs in the morning. And for me, like I'd work out, my like most productive hours are in the morning. So I do like work and whatever then, and then when I find like I'm not as focused, I'll work out later, but there's a lot of like inputs, emails, text, whatever. I found just in like the past few weeks is like putting my phone on airplane mode for that like hour or hour and a half, hour, 2 hours, whatever. Is just like, if you're overwhelmed or if you're freaking out, like put your phone on airplane mode. And then I have like these ideas, like people talk about being like creative during like long runs or whatever. Like I've never understood that until like a week or two ago, I started like not using my phone when I work out. And like, I totally hear you. Like okay, yeah, those ideas are flowing. And that was kind of like my first rapid fire question as we try and bring this one home. And I think next I'd love to ask about new beliefs, behaviors, and habits, because it sounds like you've really come into your own over the past 4 years. I mean, I feel like I'm the same way. Like looking back on the freshman year version of myself is crazy to think, like in just 3.5 years, like how much I've changed. And so somebody who's just like changed so much.
Yeah.
Personally, I'd love to hear if anything in the past few years has changed, whether that's a belief, behavior, or habit that's like really improved your life.
Yeah. I would say for sure reading. Like I was like a so-so reader like growing up, but like I would say like I'm getting better at like reading freely and more consistently. It all really started like 2 summers ago when I used to commute from my like hometown to like New York City, which was like 40 minutes or so like every morning, but it would be early in the morning, so I'd be on time. And I would literally just be like, of course, like I don't want to be on my phone like that early because there's nothing to do. So I would just read like 40 minutes there, 40 minutes back. And I found myself like going through books like that. Like now I still kind of like have a similar routine. Like at night, like I try to read for like, 20, 30 minutes, like as long as like my eyes can kind of stay open, and kind of like get a good way of just like understanding other people's perspective on, life, on their own mission. I'm only a nonfiction reader, by the way. I don't really like fiction, but just kind of getting like a good understanding of like how they feel. Currently what I'm finishing reading up is Meshaal Bannerman's biography, Becoming, which is like really good so far. Like kind of she's discussing now like her sacrificing a lot of her own kind of like goals to like be there for the family while Barack was kind of like doing his own thing. It's just good to kind of like get an understanding of like what she's going through in the time as well.
Now I have to ask, what are other books? Thank you for sharing the book you're reading now. What are other books in that time period or before that have made a particular impact on your life?
Yeah, I would say like I have books from like different stages of my life. So the younger me, like middle school, my favorite book growing up, like was funny enough, like this book that I just bought out of chance, from Dean Smith, who's like this big North Carolina college basketball coach.
Sure.
Yeah. His book called The Carolina Way, which kind of details like how he turned North Carolina into like a basketball powerhouse, which was like very detail oriented, but like an easy read as well. Like kind of the methods he took upon with like Michael Jordan to make everybody feel included in his leadership and things of that nature. And like I read that in middle school, but like a lot of things still stick with me today from like reading that book. I would say the high school version of me, definitely To Kill a Mockingbird. I think this was like when I started to become again like very socially aware of things. And I think reading that book was like it like reflected some thoughts and some feelings that I was like going through internally in like a much more articulate way. And I would say that's for sure. I would say like the college version of me, the book that I think it's like a really short book, but that I think kind of embodies where I'm at is The Four Agreements, which is kind of like, it's a very short read, but it's dope. Like I love it.
It is. I can't tell you how. Yeah, I'm showing it off because it's on my bookshelf. I want to hear what's been most impactful for you. This was a gift from my to Chris. Congratulations. From my superintendent on graduating high school. But I'd love to hear like how it's been impactful for you, because it has for me as well.
Yeah, for sure. I would say I think I read it 1.5 summers ago, or I want to say the summer of 2018. And like it's been like very impactful for me because like it's grounded like 4 simple like beliefs that like are I think crucial to anybody's life. And I think whoever like no matter where you are in life, it's important to read. I think the biggest thing for me was like the first agreement. Like I think it was like be like strong in your word or like something of that nature.
I couldn't agree more.
For me, I think for me, like that is like something that I've always like been cognizant of is like I don't want to like to say things that I don't mean. I don't like to say things that I can't stand behind or that nature. And I'm forgetting like the other like 4 off the top of my head, but all of them kind of like make a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And so the first one is be impeccable with your word, speaking with integrity, speaking what you mean. And that one is also the one I come back to a lot of times in my journal,
Right.
just reflecting upon, like, for me, I'm pretty in control of my actions. I don't do a lot of like regrettable actions, but sometimes you slip up in your words, and like words hurt. And even if they don't hurt the other person, I've found, like, I'll apologize, they'll brush it off, they'll be like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, I don't even remember you saying that, right? Just like with a friend.
Yeah.
But like, even if it doesn't hurt the other person, it hurts you. And that's like a big part of this book, is what you doing, even if it doesn't hurt others, it's gonna like hurt yourself. And
Right.
I don't know, that's been really impactful for me. Just for the listeners, the second one is don't take anything personally, which is like huge, because you can't control other people's reactions. And third one is don't make assumptions. I actually have really enjoyed that one, because, or not enjoyed, but like, I feel like it's been particularly applicable. Like, sometimes you think that somebody's doing something and you just gotta ask why, and there's always a reason why. And then the last one is always do your best, which is, I mean, it goes without saying. So I'm glad we could nerd out on that one for a second.
I'm glad you read that, though. That's like, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I remember reading that, and like that first agreement has stuck with me since.
Same.
And if it's cool with you, I'd love to ask just maybe like one or two more questions.
Yeah, of course.
I think it would be interesting to hear just like either personally or like what you've done. And I mean, you've reflected upon a lot just in the past hour plus, but like, what is it do you think most people underestimate?
I think people underestimate the power of failure. And I would say that I remember watching an interview with Kobe Bryant where he says he doesn't see something, or he doesn't see failure as something that exists. And what he meant by that is that if you're continuing to be diligent in your processes and continuing to understand, where your shortcomings lie and like what you can learn from, there is no such thing as failure. So he talked about how he missed X amount of shots in like one practice, and he didn't see that as a failure because he came back the next day and realized what he was doing wrong in his shooting motion, and therefore he was making the amount of shots that he was missing the next day, whatever it may be. And so for him, failure, it doesn't exist, because if you're actually being diligent in your process and learning from the mistakes that you've made and your shortcomings or whatever it may be, you're growing. You're not failing, but you're growing. And so he sees it as a continuing process where growth is obviously continuing, but learning from your failures is the biggest thing. And I think people really underestimate the value that is in terms of taking a leap and maybe falling short, quote unquote, whatever means failure, but you're learning something from that's making you better for now the next process. And that's an invaluable experience that I think a lot of people really underestimate. And it's something that I've underestimated myself sometimes. Taking that leap of faith, I may fail, but I may learn something that's valuable that if I stayed comfortable in my own being, I would have never learned if I, just stayed who I am. So I think for me, a big thing is, not underestimating the value of failure, for sure.
Oh, that's so good. And that really resonates with me. And for me, like a failure that like I thought was crushing was like I was injured coming into college and like couldn't play, just was doing physical therapy to heal my back. And like that was like a failure in my mind, but like little did I know that gave me the space to like reflect on, okay, you're actually more than just a baseball player. It gave me the opportunity to like grow personally and really, really analyze my own identity. And so like that was really huge for me. I'm wondering, like, do you have a favorite failure that you feel like has really kind of exponentially helped your growth?
Yeah, I would say kind of going on what you said, like the athlete related thing, like you learn lessons at the bottom that you would never learn at the top. I think that for me, like it came through like my sophomore year of high school when I didn't make the team, of course, of the varsity team, and I was on the JV team, because I think I understood then like the value of the little things in terms of, you don't always have to be the quote unquote best player on the team, whatever it may be, but what are you adding in terms of value? What are you adding in terms of team character, in terms of your part, whatever your role, whatever it may be? And I think I would have never understood that unless I, failed at some point. And I think the value of failing again, like, and why are people underestimate is you learn things that you would never learn if you're, getting A's along the way. Like, you're not even second guessing or thinking about, what can you do better? You're not never reflecting, something that we talked about. You're never really kind of taking a step back. And I think me being able to, fail like as a sophomore, like at a very young age in high school, and like reflecting on like what I can do better. It's something that like, I take those lessons and I'm still using them and applying them. Now I'm 21. Like it's crazy, but it's the truth.
Thank you for sharing that. That's super dope. And and it's just one of those things, like in the moment, you cannot see it. And now having gone through it, maybe you can like in the midst not get caught up in those struggles. And it's like, okay, whether it's rooted in faith or just kind of having gone through these experiences, like, okay, I will be better from this.
Right.
I think can power you through the darkest of times, whatever that might be. So I love that. I love that quote. Failure doesn't exist. That's so sick. And I'd like to wrap up. We kind of touched upon this, and I think a lot of Harvard students and just college students in general, like they, number one, want to be successful, and number two, have a lot of options, right? And we talked about it before we hit record. Like, this is the best problem. This is like the most privileged problem to have,
right?
Is like having a lot of options and a lot of directions we can go in. So I'm interested to hear, when you think of the word successful, who's the first person that comes to mind?
For me, it's definitely LeBron. And the reason why I say that isn't because, he's a great basketball player. The reason why I say that is because of the journey that he took to get to where he's at. Like growing up, like again, in a single parent household, he's had pressure and spotlight on him since he was like literally a teenager. And now being the person he is today, not even the basketball court, but off it, building a school, giving back to his community, being at the forefront of a lot of, athlete activism, continuing to like never forget where he came from. Like he calls himself, just a kid from Akron. He's always remembering who he's from, like where he's from and like what made him who he is. And I think that's my definition of success. You can reach any heights, reach any goals you want, but at the end of the day, do you remember who you are, and are you staying true to who you are through all of that? And for me, LeBron is someone who's like gone through almost every hurdle, has had media spotlight from him since day one, and has never changed, never switched up on who he is. And to me, that's success. Like, I don't want to be the best basketball player of all time, obviously, but if I could be someone like LeBron in terms of, staying true to who I am, no matter what challenges I face, what pressure I face, what hurdles I face, that's success to me. And I think, the reason why I really appreciate him so much is because of how he's unapologetic in who he is, and unapologetic in terms of he's never wavering from that, and he's not willing to change who he is, for sure.
Dude, that is such a great spot to wrap up. Thank you. Oh, that's so sick. And I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable, sharing your story, and all of the highs and lows and like lessons you've learned. Like, I hope people listen to this, and all the millions of people out there listening to this, obviously, and just reflect on their own lives. Maybe that's with a journal, but learning from our experience. I mean, I took just a few notes during this this convo, and I'm sure when I listen back, there'll be even more. So thank you, man. And I so appreciate you making the time and being so open.
Yeah, appreciate you so much, Chris. I mean, it's an honor to be on here, and of course, just like share, some of myself, but also just hear some of yourself as well, and like make this natural flowing conversation. It was dope, bro. And like, this is such a dope project. So appreciate you.
Well, thank you, bro. And we will see each other soon, very soon, in a week or two, back on campus. All right, brother. See you soon.
I'll see you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed that one. As always, you can find links to everything we discussed, show notes, and a lot more goodies on my website at therangeproject.weebly.com. That's The Range Project, all one word, .weebly, WEEBLY.com. Thanks so much, and see you next time.